What are some commercial uses of plant hormones?
Plant hormones are used in a variety of applications to control some aspect of plant development. Auxins are used in commercial herbicides as weed killers. Another use of auxins is to stimulate root formation. It is often referred to as the rooting hormone and applied to cuttings prior to planting. Some hormones are used to increase fruit production and prevent pre-harvest fruit drop. Gibberellins are sprayed on Thompson seedless grapes during the flowering stage to thin the flowers on each cluster, thus allowing the remaining flowers to spread out and develop larger fruit. Gibberellins are also used to enhance germination and stimulate the early emergence of seedlings in grapes. Citrus fruits, apples, peaches, and cherries. When used on cucumber plants, gibberellins promote the formation of male flowers, which is useful in the production of hybrid seeds.
What is nanotechnology?
The term nanotechnology was coined in 1974 by Norio Taniguchi, 1912 to 1999, at the University of Tokyo. It includes a number of technologies that deal with the miniaturization of existing technology down to the scale of a nanometer. 1/1000th of a meter, in size, about the size of molecules and atoms. Potential effects of nanotechnology include microcomputers capable of storing trillion of bytes of information in the size of a sugar cube, portable fluids containing nanobots that are programmed to destroy cancer cells, and airborne nanobots that are programmed to rebuild the thinning ozone layer.
Do plants ever stop growing?
Unlike many organisms that stop growing when they reach maturity, plants continue to grow during their entire lifespan. Unlimited, prolonged plant growth is described as indeterminate. The apical meristem produces an unrestricted number of lateral organs indefinitely.
What products are made from recycling plastic?
A new clothing fiber called Fortril EcoSpun is made from recycled plastic soda bottles. The fiber is knit or woven into garments such as fleece for outerwear or long underwear. The processor estimates that every pound of Fortril EcoSpun fiber results in 10 plastic bottles being kept out of landfills.
What are two of the most common forms of dementia?
The term dementia describes a group of symptoms that are caused by changes in brain function. The two most common forms of dementia in older people are Alzheimer's disease and multi-infarct dementia, sometimes called vascular dementia. These types of dementia are irreversible, which means they cannot be cured. In Alzheimer's disease, nerve cell changes in certain parts of the brain result in the death of a large number of cells. The symptoms of Alzheimer's disease range from mild forgetfulness to serious impairments in thinking, judgment, and the ability to perform daily activities. In multi-infarct dementia, a series of small strokes or changes in the brain's blood supply may result in the death of brain tissue. The location in the brain where the small strokes occur determines the seriousness of the problem and the symptoms that arise. Symptoms that begin suddenly may be a sign of this kind of dementia. People with multi-infarct dementia are likely to show signs of improvement or remain stable for long periods of time, then quickly develop new symptoms if more strokes occur. In many people with multi-infarct dementia, high blood pressure is to blame.
Why were tomatoes often called love apples and considered aphrodisiacs?
Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family. They were cultivated in Peru and introduced to Europe by Spanish explorers. Tomatoes were introduced to Italy from Morocco. So the Italian name for the fruit was Pomi d'amore, meaning apples of the Moors. The French called the tomato pommes d'amour, meaning apples of love. This latter name may have referred to the fact that tomatoes were thought to have aphrodisiac powers. Or it may have been a corruption of the Italian name. When tomato plants were first introduced to Europe, many people viewed them with suspicion. Since poisonous members of the nightshade family were commonly known. Although the tomato is neither poisonous nor an aphrodisiac, it took centuries for it to fully overcome its undeserved reputation.
How did the discovery of bacteria impact the theory of spontaneous generation?
The theory of spontaneous generation proposes that life can arise spontaneously from non-living matter. One of the first scientists to challenge the theory of spontaneous generation was the Italian physician Francesco Redi, 1626–1698. In 1668 Redi performed an experiment to show that meat placed in covered containers, either glass-covered or gauze-covered, remained free of maggots, while meat left in an uncovered container eventually became infested with maggots from flies laying their eggs on the meat. After the discovery of microorganisms by Antony van Leeuwenhoek, the controversy surrounding spontaneous generation was renewed, as it had been assumed that food became spoiled by organisms arising spontaneously within food. In 1776 Lazzaro Spallanzani, 1729–1799, showed that no growth occurred in flasks that were boiled after sealing. The controversy over the theory of spontaneous generation was finally solved in 1861 by Louis Pasteur, 1822–1895. He showed that the microorganisms found in spoiled food were similar to those found in the air. He concluded that the microorganisms that caused food to spoil were from the air and did not spontaneously arise.
How are carnivorous plants categorized?
Carnivorous plants are plants that attract, catch, and digest animal prey, absorbing the bodily juices of prey for the nutrient content. There are more than 400 species of carnivorous plants. The species are classified according to the nature of their trapping mechanism. All carnivorous plants have traps made of modified leaves with various incentives or attract ants, such as nectar or an enticing color, that can lure prey. Active traps display rapid motion in their capture of prey. The Venus flytrap, Dionaea muscipula, and the bladderwort, Utricularia vulgaris, have active traps that imprison victims. Each leaf is a two-sided trap with trigger hairs on each side. When the trigger hairs are touched, the trap shuts tightly around the prey. Semi-active traps employ a two-stage trap in which the prey is caught in the trap's adhesive fluid. As prey struggles in the fluid, the plant is triggered to slowly tighten its grip. The sundew, Drosera capensis, and butterwort, Pinguicula vulgaris, have semi-active traps. Passive traps entice insects using nectar. The passive trap leaf has evolved into a shape resembling a vase or pitcher. Once lured to the leaf, the prey falls into a reservoir of accumulated rainwater and drowns. An example of the passive trap is the pitcher plant, Sarracenia purpurea. The Green Swamp Nature Preserve in southeastern North Carolina has the most numerous types of carnivorous plants.
What type of cell is found in nerve tissue?
Neurons are specialized cells that produce and conduct impulses, or nerve signals. Neurons consist of a cell body containing a nucleus and two types of cytoplasmic extensions, dendrites and axons. Dendrites are thin, highly branched extensions that receive signals. Axons are tubular extensions that transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body, often to another neuron. Other cells in nerve tissue nourish the neurons, insulate the dendrites and axons, and promote quicker transmission of signals.
How did the search for cinnamon lead to the discovery of North and South America?
Christopher Columbus, 1451–1506, was one of many explorers trying to find a direct sea route to Asia, which during the 15th century was thought to be rich with spices. Cinnamon and other spices were so valued in Columbus's era that a new direct route to Asia would have brought untold wealth to the discoverer and his country.
What does species diversity have to do with evolution?
Species diversity is direct evidence that evolution has occurred. When species can be identified in which individuals share a number of significant traits, while also having some unique adaptations, it is logical to assume that the common traits are the result of common origin while the unique ones demonstrate adaptive radiation. An example of the significance of species diversity would be Darwin's finches of the Galapagos Islands. While the species share a common body structure that is inherited from a common ancestor, each species also demonstrates variations in beak size and structure that are indicative of their adaptations to local environments and the type of food available.
What is genetic imprinting?
Genetic imprinting is a form of epigenetic inheritance. It is demonstrated where there is a different expression of an allele depending on the parent that transmits it. An example in humans is that of two medical syndromes, both of which result from a deletion on chromosome 15. In Prader-Willi syndrome, originating from a deletion on the paternal chromosome 15, affected children have small hands and feet, short stature, mental retardation, and are obese. However, in Angelman syndrome, originating from a deletion on the maternal chromosome 15, affected children have a large mouth and tongue, severe mental and motor retardation, and a happy disposition, accompanied by excessive laughter.
What is the toxic release inventory?
Toxic Release Inventory, TRI, is a government-mandated, publicly available compilation of information on the release of over 650 individual toxic chemicals and toxic chemical categories by manufacturing facilities in the United States. The law requires manufacturers to state the amounts of chemicals they release directly to air, land, or water, or state that they transfer to off-site facilities that treat or dispose of wastes. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency compiles these reports into an annual inventory and makes the information available in a computerized database. In 2000, 23,484 facilities released 7.1 billion pounds, 3.2 billion kilograms, of toxic chemicals into the environment. Over 260 million pounds, 118 million kilograms of this total were released into surface water, 1.9 billion pounds. 86 million kilograms, were emitted into the air, over 4.13 billion pounds, 1.87 billion kilograms were released to land, and over 278 million pounds, 126 million kilograms were injected into underground wells. The total amount of toxic chemicals released in 2000 was 6.7% lower than the amount released in 1999.
What are the major groups of mollusks?
There are 4 major groups of mollusks: 1. Chitons, 2. Gastropods, which include snails, slugs, and nudibranchs, 3. Bivalves, which include clams, oysters, and mussels, and 4. Cephalopods, which include squids and octopods. Although mollusks vary widely in external appearance, most share the following body plan: 1. A muscular foot, usually used for movement; 2. A visceral mass containing most of the internal organs; and 3. A mantle fold of tissue that drapes over the visceral mass and secretes a shell, in organisms that have a shell.
How are enzymes named?
Individual enzymes are named by adding the suffix ase to the name of the substrate with which the enzyme reacts. An example of this method is the enzyme amylase, which controls the breakdown of amylose, starch. There are categories of enzymes that control certain reactions. Hydrolases control hydrolytic reactions, proteinases control protein breakdown. Synthetases control synthesis reactions. There are exceptions: trypsin and pepsin, both digestive enzymes that break down protein. Retain the names used before the modern form of nomenclature was adopted.
Which type of nitrogenous waste do various species of animals excrete?
Since it is highly toxic, excretion of pure ammonia is possible only for aquatic animals. Because ammonia is very soluble in water. Urea and uric acid are excreted by terrestrial animals. Urea is approximately 100,000 times less toxic than ammonia, so it may be stored in the body and eliminated with relatively little water loss. Uric acid requires very little water for disposal and is often excreted as a paste or dry powder. An example is guano, the solid white droppings of seabirds and bats.
What are loofah sponges?
Loofahs are non-woody vines of the cucumber family. A fibrous skeleton lies inside of the fruit, and this structure is often used as a sponge. The term loofah is commonly used when this material is used as a sponge. Dishcloth gourd, rag gourd, and vegetable sponge are other popular names for this sponge.
Do all plant cells contain chloroplasts?
No, not all plant cells contain chloroplasts. The various types of plant cells arise from meristem, rapidly dividing and undifferentiated tissue. Meristem cells do not contain chloroplasts, but have smaller organelles called proplastids. Depending on their location in a plant and how much light they receive, proplastids develop into one of several kinds of plastids with different functions. Chloroplasts are one example of a plastid that converts light energy to chemical energy, subsequently used in synthesizing organic molecules, the process of photosynthesis.
What are some examples of genetic engineering in animals and microbes?
One of the earliest applications of biotechnology was the genetic engineering of a growth hormone. Bovine GH, produced naturally in the bovine pituitary. Bovine GH can increase milk production in lactating cows. Using biotechnology, scientists bioengineered the gene that controls bovine GH production into E. coli, grew the bacteria in fermentation chambers, and thus produced large quantities of bovine GH. The bioengineered bovine GH, when injected into lactating cows, resulted in an increase of up to 20% in national milk production. Using bovine GH, farmers are able to stabilize milk production in their herds, avoiding fluctuations in production levels. A similar regimen was adapted using the pig equivalent of growth hormone, porcine GH. Injected in pigs, porcine GH reduced back fat and increased muscle, meat, gain. The first transgenic animal available as a food source on a large scale was the salmon, which reached U.S. food markets in 2001, following rigid evaluations of consumer and environmental safety. These salmon have the capability of growing from egg to market size, 6 to 10 pounds, in 18 months. As compared to conventional fish breeding, which takes up to 36 months to bring a fish to market size. The use of transgenic salmon can help reduce overfishing of wild salmon stocks.
When was a chemical disinfectant first used during a surgical procedure?
The use of a chemical disinfectant during a surgical procedure was first documented at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary in March 1865. Before surgery on a patient, Joseph Lister, 1827 to 1912. Sprayed the air with a fine mist of the phenol carbolic acid and soaked his surgical instruments in a carbolic acid solution. Although the patient later died, Lister continued his experiments. In an 1867 article in The Lancet, it was reported that Lister's postoperative surgery mortality rate dropped from 45% to 9% after he started to use chemical disinfectants in operative settings.
What are some examples of modified leaves?
Some leaves are modified to perform functions other than photosynthesis, while the tendrils of some plants are modifications to the stems and provide support for the plant. In other species, such as pea plants, Pisum sativum, the tendrils are modified leaves. In carnivorous plants, such as the Venus flytrap, Dionaea muscipula, and the pitcher plant. Sarracenia purpurea, the leaves attract, capture, and digest the insects with enzymes. The leaves of many desert plants grow mainly underground with only a small transparent window tip protruding above the soil surface. The soil covering the leaf protects it from dehydration by the harsh desert winds. The window allows light to penetrate and reach the site of photosynthesis.
What is the homunculus theory?
Illustrations from the late 17th century depict sperm containing a miniaturized adult. This preformed human was called a homunculus. It was thought at that time that the sperm, and its homunculus, contained all of the traits for building a baby and that the egg and womb served simply as incubators.
Why are mosses important?
Some mosses are decomposers that break down the substrata and release nutrients for the use of more complex plants. Mosses play an important role in controlling soil erosion. They perform this function by providing ground cover and absorbing water. Mosses are also indicators of air pollution. Under conditions of poor air quality, few mosses will exist. Peat is used as fuel to heat homes and generate electricity. Bryophytes are among the first organisms to invade areas that have been destroyed by a fire or volcanic eruption.
What are biosensors?
A biosensor is a unique combination of biological substances, e.g., microbe, cell, enzyme, antibody, linked to a detector. It can be used to measure very low concentrations of a particular substance. An example of a biosensor currently on the market is the insulin pump, which maintains correct blood glucose concentrations for diabetics.
What are turgor movements?
Turgor movements in plants are movements that are reversible. These movements are caused by changes in the turgor pressure of specific cells. For example, some plants exhibit different leaf positions during the day than at night.
What criteria are used to identify emerging infectious diseases?
Emerging infectious diseases are ones that are new, changing, have shown an increase in incidence, or have the potential to increase in the near future. There are several criteria used to identify an emerging infectious disease, including 1. A disease causing symptoms that are clearly different from all other diseases. 2. Diagnostic techniques that allow the identification of a new pathogen. 3. A locally defined disease that becomes widespread. 4. A rare disease that increases in occurrence and becomes common. 5. A mild disease that becomes severe. 6. A slowly developing disease that increases in lifespan.
How do the two forms of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, participate in photosynthesis?
During photosynthesis, light is absorbed by pigments present in organisms. Chlorophyll is the primary pigment required for photosynthesis and occurs in all photosynthetic organisms except photosynthetic bacteria. Accessory pigments such as carotenoids and chlorophyll B absorb light that chlorophyll A cannot absorb. These pigments extend the range of visible light useful for photosynthesis.
How does external fertilization differ from internal fertilization?
External fertilization is common among aquatic animals including fishes, amphibians, and aquatic invertebrates. Following an elaborate ritual of mating behavior to synchronize the release of eggs and sperm, both males and females deposit their gametes in the water at approximately the same time in close proximity to each other. The water protects the sperm and eggs from drying out. Fertilization occurs when the sperm reach the eggs. Internal fertilization requires that sperm be deposited in or close to the female reproductive tract. It is most common among terrestrial animals that either lay a shelled egg, such as reptiles and birds, or when the embryo develops for a period of time within the female body.
Which came first, DNA or RNA?
The first information molecule had to be able to reproduce itself and carry out tasks similar to those done by proteins. However, proteins, even though bigger and more complicated than DNA, can't make copies of themselves without the help of DNA and RNA. Therefore, RNA was the likely candidate for first information molecule because scientists have found that RNA, unlike DNA, can replicate and then self-edit.
What are the properties of cork that make it ideal for a variety of commercial uses?
Cork consists of densely packed cells, about 1 million cells per cubic centimeter, that contain the plant wax suberin, making cork impermeable to liquids and gases. Half of its volume is trapped air. Therefore, it is 4 times lighter than water. It is virtually indestructible, fire-resistant, and durable, resists friction, and absorbs vibration and sound. Among cork's uses are as stoppers for wine bottles, insulation for the space shuttle, and grips on symphony conductors' batons.
How is an ant colony organized?
Ants are the dominant social insects and, numerically, the most abundant. At any one time there are at least 1,015, 1 quadrillion, ants alive on the planet. In general, ant colonies contain a variety of castes, groups of individuals with a common job. Like workers or soldiers, and a queen who is in charge of egg-laying. For example, the largest and most aggressive workers make up the soldier caste, whose job it is to protect the colony against dangerous invaders. Because of the way that sex is determined among ants, males are haploid, contain 1 set of chromosomes, while females are diploid, 2 sets of chromosomes. This causes a close interrelatedness among members of a colony that is theorized as one of the reasons for the evolution of social colonies.
How fast does a hummingbird fly, and how far does the hummingbird migrate?
Hummingbirds fly at speeds up to 71 miles per hour, 114 kilometers per hour. Small species beat their wings 50 to 80 times per second, higher in courtship displays. For comparison, the following table lists the flight speeds of some other birds. The longest migratory flight of a hummingbird documented to date is the flight of a rufous hummingbird from Ramsey Canyon, Arizona, to near Mt. St. Helens, Washington, a distance of 1,414 miles 2,277 kilometers. Bird banding studies are now in progress to verify that a few rufous hummingbirds do make a 11,000 to 11,500 miles, 17,699 to 18,503 kilometers. Journey along a super Great Basin high route, a circuit that could take a year to complete. Hummingbird studies, however, are difficult to complete because so few banded birds are recovered.
What is cladogenesis?
Cladogenesis is the formation of a group of species that share a common ancestor. Cladogenesis can occur as a result of adaptive radiation, which is the divergence or splitting of one species into several.
Which scientific disciplines provide evidence for evolution?
although information from any area of natural science is relevant to the study of evolution. There are several in particular that directly support the work of Darwin and Wallace. Paleobiology, geology, and organic chemistry provide insight on how living organisms have evolved. Ecology, genetics, and molecular biology also demonstrate how living species are currently changing in response to their environments and therefore undergoing evolution.
What is a strain?
A strain or variety is a subcategory of a species. For example, Gregor Mendel's 1822–1884 work with garden peas involved various strains. One strain had purple flowers while another had white.
What is cytology?
Cytology is the study of cellular structure based on microscopic techniques. Cytology became a separate branch of biology in 1892, when the German embryologist Oskar Hertwig 1849–1922, proposed that organismic processes are reflections of cellular processes.
What are the different types of plastids?
Proplastids can differentiate into several types of plastids that are involved in cellular storage. Amyloplasts store starch, proteinoplasts store proteins, and eleoplasts store lipids. In addition, some proplastids develop into chromoplasts.
What is the basic composition of a sponge?
A sponge is supported by a skeleton made of hard crystals called spicules, whose shape and composition are important features in taxonomy. Calcareous sponges have spicules of calcium carbonates, the material of marble and limestone. The silica spicules of the hexactinellid, or glass, sponges are formed into a delicate, glassy network. Demosponges have siliceous spicules and a network of fibrous protein, spunger, that is similar to collagen. The demosponges are the source of natural household sponges, which are made by soaking dead sponges in shallow water until all the cellular material has decayed, leaving the spongin network behind. However, most sponges sold now for household use are plastic and have nothing to do with real sponges.
What determines the type of bond that forms between atoms?
The electron structure of an atom is the best predictor of its chemical behavior. Atoms with filled outer shells tend not to form bonds. However, those atoms with 1, 2, 6, or 7 electrons in the outer shell tend to become ions and form ionic bonds. Atoms with greater than 2 or less than 6 electrons tend to form covalent bonds.
If an allele is lethal, then why would it not disappear from a population totally?
In the example of cystic fibrosis, heterozygotes may be more resistant to life-threatening dehydration caused by diseases such as cholera, which is accompanied by massive diarrhea. In cholera, caused by the lethal bacterium Vibrio cholera, the bacteria produce a toxin that causes considerable loss of water, dehydration, and death within a short time. Another example of heterozygote advantage is the high frequency of heterozygotes for sickle cell anemia in Africa, and increased resistance to malaria.
Why are bacteria known as pollution fighters?
Through a process known as bioremediation, bacteria are able to degrade many pollutants found in soil and water. They are also capable of altering a harmful substance so it becomes harmless or even beneficial to its environment. Scientists are working to improve bacteria's efficiency as a natural pollution fighter.
What are the major classes of plant hormones?
The 5 major classes of plant hormones are auxins, gibberellins, cytokinins, ethylene, and abscisic acid.
What is gradualism?
The Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution is based on gradualism, the idea that speciation occurs by the gradual accumulation of new traits. This would allow one species to gradually evolve into a different-looking one over many generations, which is the scale of evolutionary time.
How is the light in fireflies produced?
The light produced by fireflies, Photinus pyroles, or lightning bugs, is a kind of heatless light called bioluminescence. It is caused by a chemical reaction in which the substance luciferin undergoes oxidation when the enzyme luciferase is present. The flash is a photon of visible light that radiates when the oxidating chemicals produce a high energy state, which then reverts back to the normal state. The flashing is controlled by the nervous system and takes place in special cells called photocytes. The nervous system, photocytes, and the tracheal end organs control the flashing rate. The air temperature also seems to be correlated with the flashing rate. The higher the temperature, the shorter the interval between flashes, 8 seconds at 65 degrees Fahrenheit. 18.3 degrees Celsius, and 4 seconds at 82 degrees Fahrenheit 27.7 degrees Celsius. Scientists are uncertain as to why this flashing occurs. The rhythmic flashes could be a means of attracting prey or enabling mating fireflies to signal in heliographic codes that differ from one species to another, or they could serve as a warning signal.
What is bDNA?
There are 3 different structural forms of DNA. The secondary structure of DNA varies according to the amount of water surrounding the molecule. The structure that Watson and Crick described is bDNA. And evidence supports that this is the predominant form of most cells. bDNA is a beta helix with a clockwise spiral. Another structural form, aDNA, exists when there is less water immediately surrounding the molecule. aDNA is an alpha, right-handed, helix, but it is shorter and wider than bDNA. The third form, zDNA, is a left-handed helix in which the sugar phosphate groups zigzag. This form is found when certain specific base sequences are present.
What is the latest genome to be made public?
In January 2004, the first draft of the honeybee genome was made available.
In what way can forest fires be good for the environment?
Wildfires are critical to maintaining the integrity of forest and grassland ecosystems. Forest and grass fires, usually started by lightning, act as an ecologically renewing force by creating necessary conditions for plant germination and continued healthy growth to occur. The primary goal of fire management is to simulate the revitalizing aspects of natural fire cycles. Fire management also attempts to prevent large catastrophic wildfires from occurring by removing accumulated debris from forests. Seen throughout the American West every summer, these extremely intense fires are caused primarily by decades of fire suppression, which has allowed heavy fuels accumulated debris to build up. Ironically, by attempting to prevent natural fires, humans have only increased their prevalence.
What is the Krebs cycle?
The Krebs cycle, also referred to as the citric acid cycle, is central to aerobic metabolism. It is an adaptation that allows cells to gain increased energy from glucose. The process is critical to the development of multicellular organisms, and is essential to the harvesting of high-energy electrons during the final breakdown of the glucose molecule. Byproducts of this cycle are carbon dioxide and water. It is named in recognition of the German chemist Hans Krebs. 1900 to 1981, who received the 1953 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine.
If primates are so close to humans, both genetically and evolutionarily, then why can't they speak?
Scientists used to think that apes were not intelligent enough to speak. However, it is now thought that an ape's vocal cords are not built for speech. After many years of observations, it is well known that apes do use vocal communication. But it is usually in the form of hoots and grunts, with accompanying gestures.
What is a biogeochemical cycle?
The elements that organisms need most: carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, cycle through the physical environment, the organism, and then back to the environment. Each element has a distinctive cycle that depends on the physical and chemical properties of the element. Examples of biogeochemical cycles include the carbon and nitrogen cycles, both of which have a prominent gaseous phase. Examples of biogeochemical cycles with a prominent geologic phase include phosphorus and sulfur, where a large portion of the element may be stored in ocean sediments. Examples of cycles with a prominent atmospheric phase include carbon and nitrogen.
In what ways are earthworms beneficial?
Earthworms help maintain fertile soil. An earthworm literally eats its way through soil and decaying vegetation. As it moves about, the soil is turned, aerated, and enriched by nitrogenous wastes. Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882, calculated that a single earthworm could eat its own weight in soil every day. Much of what is eaten is then excreted on the Earth's surface in the form of casts. The worms then rebury these casts with their burrowing process. In addition, Darwin claimed that 2.5 acres, 1 hectare, of soil might contain 155,000 earthworms, which in 1 year would bring 18 tons of soil to the surface, and in 20 years might build a new layer 3 in, 11 centimeters, thick.
What are the three types of fibers found in the cytoskeleton of eukaryotic cells?
The cytoskeleton is a network of fibers that maintains the shape of cells. The three types of fibers are actin filaments, microtubules, and intermediate filaments. Actin filaments are long fibers composed of two protein chains. They are responsible for cellular movements, such as contraction, crawling, pinching during division, and formation of cellular extensions. Microtubules are hollow tubes composed of a ring of 13 protein filaments. They are responsible for moving materials within the cell. Intermediate filaments are tough, fibrous protein molecules structured in an overlapping arrangement. They are intermediate in size when compared to actin filaments and microtubules, and provide structural stability to cells.
What are the stages of insect metamorphosis?
There are two types of metamorphoses. Mark structural changes in the growth processes: complete and incomplete. In complete metamorphosis, the insect, such as an ant, moth, butterfly, termite, wasp, or beetle, goes through all the distinct stages of growth to reach adulthood. In incomplete metamorphosis, the insect, such as a grasshopper, cricket, or louse, does not go through all the stages of complete metamorphoses. Complete metamorphosis. Egg. One egg is laid at a time, or many, as much as 10,000. Larva. What hatches from the eggs is called a larva. A larva can look like a worm. Pupa. After reaching its full growth, the larva hibernates, developing a shell or pupal case for protection. A few insects, example the moth, spin a hard covering called a cocoon. The resting insect is called a pupa, except the butterfly is called a chrysalis, and remains in the hibernation state for several weeks or months. Adult. During hibernation, the insect develops its adult body parts. When it has matured physically, the fully grown insect emerges from its case or cocoon. Incomplete metamorphosis. Egg. One egg or many eggs are laid. Early stage nymph. Hatched insect resembles an adult but is smaller in size. However, those insects that would normally have wings have not yet developed them. Late stage nymph. At this time the skin begins to molt, shed, and the wings begin to bud. Adult. The insect is now fully grown.
What is microevolution?
Microevolution is the change in allelic frequencies that occurs at the level of the population or species. When individuals with certain traits are more successful at reproduction, the ensuing generation will have more copies of that trait. Should the trend continue, eventually the traits will become so common in the population that the population profile will change. This is microevolution.
Are any other animals able to drink seawater?
Birds and reptiles that live near the sea are also able to drink seawater. These animals have nasal salt glands near their eyes through which they excrete the excess quantities of salt solution.
What is a biological clock?
A biological clock controls a biological rhythm. It involves an internal pacemaker with external, usually environmental, cues. An environmental signal that cues the clock for animals is called ein Zeitgeber, a German term meaning time giver. Examples of Zeitgebers include light and dark cycles, high and low tides, temperature, and food availability.
What are some examples of polygenic inheritance?
Phenotypes of a given trait that are controlled by more than one gene are described as having polygenic inheritance. Examples of polygenic inheritance in humans include height, weight, skin color, and intelligence. Some congenital malformations, birth defects, like clubfoot, cleft palate, or neural tube defects are also the result of multiple gene interactions.
How is it possible to identify the genus and species of a plant based on its wood?
The arrangement of plant cells present in the xylem of wood allows for the identification of a plant's genus. For example, the wood of oak trees, genus Quercus, is dense and heavy because it has abundant fibers.
What distinguishes the different types of microscopes?
Microscopes have played a central role in the development of cell biology, allowing scientists to observe cells and cell structures that are not visible to the human eye. The two basic types of microscopes are light microscopes and electron microscopes. The major differences between light and electron microscopes are the source of illumination and the construction of the lenses. Light microscopes utilize visible light as the source of illumination and a series of glass lenses. Electron microscopes utilize a beam of electrons emitted by a heated tungsten filament as the source of illumination. The lens system consists of a series of electromagnets. Recent advances using optical techniques have led to the development of specialized light microscopes, including fluorescence microscopy, phase contrast microscopy, and differential interference contrast microscopy. In fluorescence microscopy, a fluorescent dye is introduced to specific molecules. Both phase contrast microscopy and differential interference contrast microscopy utilize techniques that enhance and amplify slight changes in the phase of transmitted light as it passes through a structure that has a different refractive index than the surrounding medium.
What are the major types of bonds?
There are three major types of chemical bonds: covalent, ionic, and hydrogen. The form of bond that is established is determined by a specific arrangement between the electrons. Ionic bonds are formed when electrons are exchanged between two atoms, and the resulting bond is relatively weak. An ionic bond is found in salt. Covalent bonds occur when electrons are shared between atoms. This form of bond is strongest and is found in both energy-rich molecules and molecules essential to life. Hydrogen bonds are temporary, but they are important because they are crucial to the shape of a particular protein and have the ability to be rapidly formed and reformed, as in the case of muscle contraction. The following chart explains the types of bonds and their characteristics.
What is a restriction endonuclease?
A restriction endonuclease is an enzyme that cleaves DNA at specific sites. Restriction enzymes are made by bacteria as a means of bacterial warfare against invading bacteriophages, viruses that infect bacteria. These enzymes are now used extensively in biotechnology to cleave DNA into shorter fragments for analysis or to selectively cut plasmids so that foreign DNA can be inserted.
How do animals know which prey to eat?
Once an animal has located a potential food, it must decide whether to consume or ignore it. In field studies, behavioral ecologists have observed that animals usually select food that will yield the higher rate of energy return for the energy spent capturing the food. Very few animals actually eat all of the food they are capable of consuming. This is known as optimal foraging strategy. As an example, crows that live in the Pacific Northwest often find little neck clams, which they drop on rocks to crack the clams and then eat them. However, the crows do not eat all the clams they locate. They only eat those clams that are larger and thus contain more energy.
How far from shore do shark attacks occur?
In a study of 570 shark attacks, it was found that most shark attacks occur near shore. These data are not surprising since most people who enter the water stay close to the shore.
How does brown fat differ from white fat?
Many mammals have both brown adipose tissue and white adipose tissue. They are both triglyceride lipids, but brown fat tissue has the ability to generate heat. Although called brown, it varies in color from dark red to tan, reflecting lipid content. It is most commonly found in newborn animals and in most species disappears by adulthood.
What are the common types of slide preparations for investigation with a microscope?
Commonly prepared slide preparations are whole mounts, smears, squashes, and sections. Smears, squashes, and sections are techniques used to make specimens thinner or smaller. Whole mounts are often used to examine an entire organism or specific organ structure in some detail. Smears are mostly prepared for bacteriological and blood specimens. Squashes are prepared to study chromosomes. Sections are prepared to examine tissues and cells.
What is a gene library?
A gene library is a collection of cloned DNA, usually from a specific organism. Just as a conventional library stores information in books and computer files. A gene library stores genetic information either for an entire genome, a single chromosome, or specific genes in a cell. For example, one can find the gene library of a specific disease such as cystic fibrosis. The chromosome where most cystic fibrosis mutations occur, or the entire genome of those individuals affected by the disease.
Who first proposed that the cell membrane is composed of a bilayer structure of lipids?
In 1925 Evert Gorter, 1881–1954, and F. Grendel, two Dutch physiologists, hypothesized that there is a bilayer structure of lipids on the cell surface. Their work was significant because it was the first attempt to understand membranes at the molecular level.
Do all females take care of their offspring?
While females are the most common primary caregivers, in some species, e.g., sea orzes, males are the primary caregivers for their offspring. Male parental care may be as simple as defending the nest against potential predators, or as time-consuming as providing food and the shelter of their bodies for young hatchlings. In other species such as guppies, no parental care by either sex is provided.
What is the origin of land plants?
Many scientists believe land plants evolved from green algae. Green algae, especially the carpites, share a number of biochemical and metabolic traits with plants. Both contain the same photosynthetic pigment scaritines, xanthophylls, as well as chlorophylls A and B. Cellulose is a major component of the cell walls of plants and algae, and both store their excess carbohydrates as starch. In addition, some aspects of cell division, particularly the formation of new cross walls, only occurs in plants and certain carpites, such as species of the genera Cerera and Colechid.
What is the cellular fountain of youth?
Research on telomeres and telomerase shows that cells can be kept alive far beyond their normal lifespan. Specific studies have been carried out on the roundworm, C. elegans, in which longer lifespans were observed in worms with longer telomeres.
What is the race for the double helix?
Great minds on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean were intent on finding the structure of DNA. Race for the Double Helix is a BBC TV production, 1986. Based on the research and personal interactions of those who worked on the structure of DNA during the 1950s. The main characters included James Watson, American, 1928, Francis Crick, British, 1916 to 2004. Rosalind Franklin, British, 1920 to 1958, Maurice Wilkins, British, 1916, Peter Pauling, Linus Pauling's son. American, 1931 to 2003, John Randall, British, 1905 to 1984, and Edwin Chargaff, French, 1905 to 2002.
Which tree species from the United States have lived the longest?
Of the 850 different species of trees in the United States, the oldest species is the bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva. This species grows in the deserts of Nevada and Southern California, particularly in the White Mountains. Some of these trees are believed to be over 4,600 years old. The potential lifespan of these pines is estimated to be 5,500 years. But potential age of the bristlecone pine is very young when compared to the oldest surviving species in the world, the maidenhair tree, Ginkgo biloba, of China. This species of tree first appeared during the Jurassic era, some 160 million years ago. Also called Eiko, or the Ginkgo, meaning silver apricot. This species has been cultivated in Japan since 1100 BCE.